What if I told you that the one place everyone expected Russia to capture this year is suddenly turning into a trap for the Russian army itself? Because right now, in the Lyman direction, something is happening that almost nobody saw coming, and even Russian military bloggers are quietly admitting it. Before we go deeper into this, do me one small favor. If you want honest updates like this one, hit that like button, tap subscribe, and share this video with someone who follows the war closely. Because the more this channel grows, the more freely I can keep telling you the truth without holding back. Now let's get into it. So let me set the scene for you first, because the story of Lyman is not just about one town. It is about momentum, and momentum in war can flip faster than people realize. Lyman sits in that awkward space between a city and a big town. It is not huge, but its location makes it valuable. Roads pass through it, supply lines feed off it, and whoever controls it can pressure a much wider stretch of the front. For months, the situation there looked grim for Ukraine. Russian forces were pushing hard, Ukrainian units were struggling to hold their ground, and the main supply artery into the area had been cut. When your supply lines get cut, you usually start losing. That is the brutal logic of modern war. No supplies means no ammunition, no reinforcements, and no way to sustain a defense. And here's the strange part. Instead of collapsing, Ukraine did the exact opposite. They went on the attack. Now think about how surprising that is. A force that was barely holding on, a force whose supply routes were choked, suddenly launched a counterattack and started liberating villages. This is the kind of thing that makes analysts stop and rewind the map. The first sign came from Russian sources themselves. A well-known Russian military blogger, someone closely tied to their defense establishment, published a map showing Ukrainian arrows pushing forward in the Lyman area. And when Russian channels admit that Ukraine is advancing, you can be almost certain that the real situation on the ground is even worse for Russia than they are letting on. They tend to show the most flattering version of events. So if their flattering version already shows Ukrainian gains, the truth is probably harsher. Let me explain how Ukraine even pulled this off, because this is where it gets fascinating. To move forces into the Lyman pocket, Ukraine needed to cross a river, the Siverskyi Donets. With the main bridges damaged or destroyed, that seems almost impossible. But Ukrainian engineers did something both simple and brilliant. They laid down pontoon bridges. These are temporary floating bridges that can be assembled quickly across a river. Russian sources actually reported these bridges being placed just days before the counterattack, and the results showed up almost immediately. More Ukrainian troops, more armor, more capability, all pushed across that river and into the fight. Russia, of course, tries to destroy these pontoon bridges. They hit them, they blow sections apart, and they think the problem is solved. But Ukraine keeps rebuilding them again and again. Every time a bridge goes down, another one goes up. It is a frustrating, exhausting cycle for the Russian side, because no matter how many times they strike, the Ukrainian supply flow refuses to fully die. And to hold Lyman, Ukraine absolutely must keep this lifeline open. So now you have Ukrainian forces counterattacking towards several villages at once. Names that most people have never heard of, small settlements scattered across the fields, but each one matters because of what it represents on the map. In the south of this zone, Ukraine liberated a couple of villages. To the west and along other vectors, Ukrainian units are pressing forward, threatening to squeeze Russian forces into an uncomfortable position. And this is where the word encirclement starts to enter the conversation. Here's the danger for the Russian army. As Ukraine pushes along multiple directions, the Russian troops in certain villages risk getting jammed together, boxed in with fewer and fewer ways out. And when you look at how they are supplied, the picture gets even scarier for them. In some of these areas, there is basically a single usable road feeding Russian positions, just one. Everything else is small dirt tracks and open field paths, and Ukraine is watching that road like a hawk. Anything that tries to move supplies along it becomes a target. Trucks, vehicles, convoys, all of it exposed to drones and artillery. Imagine being a soldier stuck in a village where only one road connects you to food, water, ammunition, and rescue, and that road is under constant surveillance and fire. That is not a comfortable place to be. That is a slow-motion crisis. And honestly, it is hard to see how Russia easily fixes it. They can throw more men and machines at the problem, but every attempt to reinforce just creates more targets. Now I want to be fair and give you the full picture, because good analysis never ignores the other side of the coin. Russia still has a massive advantage in raw resources. Several times more soldiers, more equipment, more of almost everything compared to Ukraine. That is simply the reality. But here is the twist that Russia created for itself. By pushing for such a long, stretched-out front line, they spread their strength thin. They can concentrate power in a few chosen spots and win there. Places in the Kharkiv region, parts of Donetsk, and certain other hotspots. Wherever the Russian command pours its main effort, they tend to make progress. But the rest of that enormous front becomes vulnerable. And the moment they lose focus somewhere, Ukraine pounces and grabs the initiative. So in a strange way, this gigantic front line cuts both ways. Yes, it forces Ukraine to split its smaller army across many sectors, which is a real burden. But it also gives Ukraine openings, because Russia cannot be strong everywhere at once, and Ukraine has learned to defend smartly. They have built serious defensive lines, they use drone technology more aggressively and more creatively, and they pick their moments to strike where it hurts the enemy most. Lyman is a perfect example of that patient, opportunistic approach paying off. Let me pause here for a moment because I want to ask something of you directly. If this breakdown is helping you actually understand what is happening instead of just seeing headlines, drop a quick comment with the word clear so I know these deep dives are worth continuing. That tiny action tells the algorithm this content matters, and it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who care about the truth. All right, let's keep going. I will be honest with you about how my own thinking has changed. Not long ago, I was fairly convinced that Russia would capture Lyman this year. The signs pointed that way. They had cut the main bridge leading toward Sloviansk, which was Ukraine's key supply artery in that area. When your enemy severs your main supply line, the outlook is usually bleak. But this counterattack has made me seriously doubt that prediction. Ukraine has now pushed Russian forces back from at least one important road, and by doing that, they have started clearing alternate supply connections. Supplies can now flow through different routes, using the bridges that remain plus those stubborn pontoon crossings that keep getting rebuilt. This is the difference between a force that is dying and a force that is adapting. Ukraine is adapting. They are finding new paths, reopening choked routes, and refusing to let Lyman slip away. And every day they hold and push, they chip away at Russia's earlier gains in that direction. Now let me zoom out and talk about the bigger philosophy behind these maps, because this is crucial for understanding everything you see online. When you look at maps published by Russian sources, remember who makes them and why. These maps often paint the rosiest possible picture for Russia. So when even those maps show gray zones, contested areas, and Ukrainian advances, you should read that as an admission. A gray zone on a Russian map often means an area they wish they controlled, but actually do not. Take some of the other hot directions, for example. Around Pokrovsk and nearby areas, Russia genuinely does have an advantage and has been advancing. They push into gray zones, plant a few flags, and their channels celebrate. But planting a flag is not the same as controlling a settlement. Ukraine keeps drones flying over these areas constantly, and those flag-raising operations often end badly for the soldiers who attempt them. Holding ground under a sky full of drones is brutally difficult. So even in places where Russia is technically advancing, the reality is messy, bloody, and far less clean than their maps suggest. There are villages that Russian maps mark as captured, yet there is no real confirmation that Russia holds them. Some remain firmly under Ukrainian control. In fact, when Russian convoys tried to move toward certain settlements, they were destroyed on the way, wiped out before they could establish anything. So the gap between the map and the ground can be enormous. This is why I always tell you to think critically. A colored arrow is a claim, not a fact. The fact is what actually happens when soldiers try to hold that dirt. Let me give you another window into how this war really works, because it explains so much about why Russia struggles despite its size. Consider the difference in technology and coordination. In many areas, Ukrainian forces are using advanced drones, some with high-quality zoom cameras, some that can fly toward a target without a constant control link, meaning they cannot be easily jammed. Picture a Russian soldier standing near a convoy holding a machine gun, spinning around, searching the sky, trying to figure out where the buzzing threat is coming from. But he has no system to detect the drone's direction. He looks the wrong way. He fixes his eyes on one spot while death approaches from behind. That is not bad luck. That is a technology gap. Ukrainian forces increasingly have systems that at least warn when a drone is incoming. That warning alone can save lives. Russian troops in many sectors lack that same electronic edge, and in modern war, that small difference decides who goes home and who does not. Those convoys that are supposed to carry supplies forward become the number one targets, and the men guarding them become victims of the very mission they were sent to protect. This connects to a much bigger trend. Right now, Russia is actually launching fewer attacks than before, and the reason is telling. They are running low on supplies to sustain their usual waves of assaults. During the peak months, Russia was throwing enormous numbers of soldiers into attacks and suffering record losses. One month in particular saw a staggering number of Russian casualties. But recently, the pace has slowed. Some analysts estimate Russia may lose noticeably fewer soldiers in certain months, not because they suddenly care about their men, but because they simply cannot supply enough attacks. Fewer supplies means fewer assaults, and fewer assaults means fewer losses, at least temporarily. And this points towards something important looming on the horizon. Many observers believe Russia will eventually announce another wave of mobilization. They need more men to keep feeding this machine because their style of warfare burns through soldiers at a terrifying rate. When your strategy depends on constant infantry assaults and infiltration attempts, you always need more bodies. That is not strength. That is a system that only works by sacrifice. Speaking of infiltration, let me tell you about a revealing incident, because it shows both what Russia attempts and why it usually fails. A small group of Russian soldiers managed to cross a surprising amount of territory, slipping past a couple of settlements, moving across open fields, trying to infiltrate deep into an area. On paper, that sounds impressive. They covered real distance, but here is how it ended. Part of the group was destroyed along the way. The rest reached a house in daytime, were spotted almost immediately, and were eliminated. Their journey ended on a quiet street named after a famous Ukrainian writer, inside an ordinary house that became their final stop. This is the harsh lesson of the modern battlefield. Yes, you can physically infiltrate into enemy territory, but you are walking into a kill zone, a place saturated with drones and observation. For what? To rack up more losses. This is exactly why Ukraine does not throw its infantry into these long, exposed infiltration marches. When Ukraine does infiltrate, they do it carefully, often with armored vehicles to protect the soldiers, and with well-organized planning. The goal is to preserve life, not waste it. Let me take a quick breath here and speak to you person to person. I know these updates carry a lot of weight, and I know some of you have been watching this channel for a long time. If you believe this kind of careful, honest coverage deserves to reach more eyes, take 3 seconds to share this video anywhere you can. A group chat, a family member, a friend who keeps asking what is really going on. That single share does more than you might imagine. Thank you for that. Now let's continue. There is an encouraging shift happening inside the Ukrainian military itself, and it deserves attention. There is talk of reforming certain units, reorganizing brigades and regiments, and moving away from reckless, costly tactics. One unit that was built for mobilized soldiers is reportedly being restructured and reduced in size, with its soldiers redistributed to other units. Now that might sound like a downgrade, but it actually reflects smarter thinking. The old approach of throwing men forward in desperate charges, that hooray-style push borrowed from Russian tactics, is being canceled. Instead, the emerging philosophy is patient and calculated. Stay mostly on defense, strike forward only in specific spots where the gain is worth the cost. Preserve soldiers, conserve resources, and let Russia grind itself down in wasteful attacks. This is a far wiser way for a country with fewer men to fight. You do not win a war of attrition by matching your larger enemy loss for loss. You win it by making your enemy pay far more than you do for every meter of ground. This shift is closely tied to leadership. The current commander leading Ukraine's army thinks differently from his predecessor. He is described as more competent, more thoughtful, and he is actively reforming the army from the inside. And that matters, because leadership decides whether soldiers are used wisely or wasted. To understand why this change is so significant, we have to look back at one of the most debated decisions of this entire war. Cast your mind back a couple of years to the start of the Kursk operation, when Ukraine pushed into Russian territory itself. At the time, it felt electric. For the first time, a nuclear superpower had its own land invaded by a non-nuclear neighbor and was forced onto the back foot. The operation was designed as a bold raid, meant to force Russia to pull troops away from the east, to capture prisoners, and to disrupt Russian forces that had been pressing Kharkiv. And the first week was a genuine success. Ukrainian forces drove deep into Russian territory with surprising speed, even without huge numbers of troops. But here is where the story turns painful. Russian resistance in the deeper areas proved tougher than expected, and this is the moment where many analysts, including respected experts on this war, believe Ukraine should have pulled back. The tactical shock had already been achieved. The bigger strategic prize, something like gaining leverage over a nuclear power plant to trade against Russian-held facilities, was never secured. And once that larger goal slipped out of reach, the logical move was to withdraw and preserve the force. Instead, Ukrainian presence in Kursk dragged on for months, nearly 8 months by some accounts. And during that long stretch, the costs piled up. Too many avoidable losses. Some of Ukraine's best equipment, its most capable attacking units, its armor, all committed to holding a position that no longer served a clear strategic purpose. Meanwhile, in the east, Russian forces exploited the gap. They pushed into strategic towns, they crossed key lines, and in several places they advanced without facing. The strong Ukrainian resistance that might have been there if those forces had not been tied up in Kursk. The numbers tell a sobering story. During the extended period of Ukrainian presence in Kursk, Russia achieved a large share of its gains in the Donbas. Yet once Ukraine shifted its focus back toward defense, the pace of Russian gains dropped dramatically. That contrast is not a coincidence. It is a lesson written in territory and lives. When Ukraine concentrated on smart defense, it secured ground and made Russia bleed for every step. I will admit something honestly. Back then I was cheering too. It was thrilling to watch. There was even open conflict on the Russian side, with different factions blaming each other for the collapse at the border, generals and security services pointing fingers over who abandoned positions. It was a genuine humiliation for Russia in that moment. But being honest as an analyst means admitting when the emotional high did not match the strategic reality. Ukraine advanced fast, but could not extend its supply lines quickly enough. Russia gathered reserves, counterattacked bit by bit, and eventually pushed Ukrainian forces back. Worse, that operation gave Russia momentum to press into Ukraine's own Sumy region, and some Ukrainian settlements there remain under Russian control because of it. So when I look at Lyman today and see a more disciplined, defense-minded, resource-conscious approach, I feel a cautious sense of relief. It suggests the lessons of Kursk have been absorbed. Under the current leadership, the reckless spending of soldiers appears to be ending, replaced by a strategy that values patience and survival. And that kind of thinking, more than any single village captured, is what could truly change the direction of this war. But leadership alone is not enough. Real, lasting reform also depends on strong civilian leadership at the top of the defense ministry. There is ongoing discussion about who should hold that role, and names float around in interviews and rumors. One respected figure, deeply connected to Ukraine's drone efforts, has hinted he might still take on a major role and continues to help the army however he can. He remains in direct contact with key international figures in the tech world, trying to find creative ways to counter Russian ballistic missile launchers using advanced connectivity tools. These conversations matter because the war is not only fought in the trenches, it is fought in workshops, in negotiations, and in the search for technological edges. And this leads to one of the most emotionally heavy parts of the current picture, the question of air defense. Ukraine's leadership has voiced a painful concern. There is a sense that some Western partners may be reluctant to give Ukraine the full air defense capabilities it desperately needs, possibly as a form of pressure to push Ukraine toward negotiations on unfavorable terms. If that is true, it is a deeply troubling idea, because without strong air defense, Russian ballistic missiles strike almost everything, including ordinary civilian infrastructure. Homes, power stations, the basic things people need to survive. Think about what that really means. Withholding the shield that protects civilians, using their safety as a bargaining chip, is a cruel form of leverage. If a country is denied the tools to protect its own people from missiles raining down on cities, then the line between pressure and cruelty starts to blur. And that is a moral question the whole world should be sitting with, not just the people living under those skies. So let me bring all of this together, because the story of Lyman is really the story of this entire war in miniature. On the surface, it looks like a small counterattack around a modest town, but underneath, it reveals everything. It shows Ukraine's ability to adapt under impossible conditions, rebuilding bridges the moment they are destroyed. It shows Russia's fatal weakness, an overstretched front and supply lines so thin that a single road becomes a lifeline. It shows the power of technology, where a soldier searching the sky for a drone he cannot detect symbolizes an entire mismatch of capability. And it shows the hard-won wisdom of leadership that finally understands that preserving your soldiers is not weakness, it is strategy. For months, Lyman looked like it would fall. Today, it is Russia's forces who risk being surrounded, squeezed, and starved of supplies. That reversal did not happen by luck. It happened through engineering, patience, smart use of drones, and a refusal to give up on a lifeline everyone assumed was already cut. And whether or not Ukraine fully encircles Russian units there, the message is already clear. Nothing on this front is guaranteed for Russia, no matter how much larger their army is on paper. That is the truth I want you to carry with you. Size is not the same as strength. Numbers on a map are not the same as control on the ground. And a force that thinks, adapts, and values every single life can turn even the most desperate situation into an opportunity. Lyman is proof of that, playing out in real time. So what will happen in Lyman in the next 48 hours? Watch the road from Zelina to Lina. Watch the village of Shandry-Holov. If Ukraine reports control over that road, you will know the trap is closed. And when it closes, it will not just be a small victory on a map. It will be proof that even when Russia cuts your bridges, you can build new ones in the dark and turn their dream of victory into their worst nightmare. And that is exactly what is happening right now. Keep your eyes on Lyman. Because history might be repeating itself, and this time it is awesome. Before you go, let me leave you with this. If you made it all the way to the end, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is for, someone who wants understanding, not just noise. So please, hit like if you haven't yet, subscribe so you never miss the next update, and drop your honest thoughts in the comments because I read them and they shape what I cover next. Stay sharp, stay thoughtful, and no matter where you're watching from, I truly wish you a peaceful sky above your head and a safe road ahead. I will see you in the next one.